Today is November 20th. It is about 5:20 p.m. in Israel, about 10:20 a.m. on the Eastern Coast in the United States. It is the 45th day of the war. Let's get started right away with some good news. Israel is getting tremendous information from captives and from civilians that have been just volunteering information from Palestinians on the street who hate Hamas and volunteering information as to where Hamas is hiding and different tunnel openings from Hamas. Because of that, Israel has found hiding spots throughout all of Gaza. There's a lot of the fighters; they're not just hiding in tunnels, but they're hiding in various different spots around Gaza. And those spots are being revealed, and Israel is taking out those members. They're also capturing a lot of members of Hamas. And they are gaining information from them. So those are very, very good developments, and we are progressing steadily and strongly. Shifa Hospital in Gaza, the hospital that's been in the news and been a source of controversy, where anti-Israel advocates and countries have been saying that Israel has no right to attack the hospital, even though under international law it does, and Israel followed international law, which is why nobody's talking about saying that Israel is actually violating war crimes, because they're not. They're conducting this operation under exactly as international law would demand. But in the hospital, for weeks they were denying the fact that this was used as a Hamas headquarters. Israel provided proof by finding weapons in the hospital, and then Gazan doctors came out and said that that's not true, that the evidence was planted, and we've never seen weapons in. And then Israel found the CC video that the hospital uses for its own security purposes, and then showed video of hostages being taken in, Israeli hostages being taken into the hospital by Hamas members, armed Hamas members. And doctors are standing all around seeing this. They've also produced older videos where it's been shown that doctors standing around armed gunmen. A British doctor that worked in the hospital for a few years talked about, from his home in London now, talked about how when he was working in the hospital, there were certain areas of the hospital that were off limits, and that you were threatened to be shot if you went near them. So all this information is coming out. Amnesty International, which is always against Israel, in 2015 came out with a report that the hospital was being used by Hamas to interrogate other Palestinians. So it's become abundantly clear to anybody with an open mind that this hospital is more than a hospital. There's been tunnel entrances found. Reporters have been allowed to look at the tunnel entrances. They've been videotaped in front of the tunnel entrances. CNN did a report from the entrance of the tunnel right next to the hospital. So this has become clear. The Gazan port, which is on the Mediterranean coast, right? Gaza is on the coast. So it has beaches and it also has a port. So the Gaza port was taken over by Israel. I had thought they had taken it over weeks ago, but evidently not. And the way they did this, which is interesting, is something that Israel's using in Gaza now all the time, is that tanks will fire at a location, drones will fly over in real time, send pictures right after the tanks shoot, and then see the damage that the tanks caused and what still has to be hit by the tank in real time. This is how the operation is being played out in Gaza. Drones sending back images in exactly real time as to what's been hit, and then being sent back to the tanks. Tanks are able to adjust their sights and hit the new places. So the port has been completely taken by Israel. Okay, and then after not just in the port, but in other areas where the tank hits, and then the drone takes a picture, the tank hits again. Then once the tanks are satisfied that they've hit enough spots, special forces, the Shayarets, go in from Israel and seal off anything else. Then they find the tunnel entrances. They blow up the tunnels with explosives and then seal it up with something that we've been talking about called the sponge bomb, not SpongeBob, but sponge bomb, which explodes in the tunnels and seals up the tunnels with a chemical substance that looks like sponge, and then the tunnel is sealed up and unable to be used again. Okay, there's still rumors about a hostage deal being done. Nobody's denying that there are negotiations, but the Americans are very optimistic about this happening, and they keep talking about it. While Prime Minister Netanyahu keeps saying until there's a deal, there's no deal. Supposedly, again, we're not in the negotiations, so we don't know, but supposedly the deal is calling for the release of between 50 and 100 Israeli women and children hostages in exchange for a similar amount of women and children not hostages, inmates that were arrested by Israel for terrorist activities that associate themselves with Hamas, and a ceasefire that would either last for 3 to 5 days. So those are the options on the table. It's a difficult choice for Israel. On the one hand, it wants to get the hostages back. On the other hand, any ceasefire with Hamas allows Hamas to gain strength by allowing it to rearm and re-strategize, as opposed to the tremendous pressure that Israel is putting on it now. In other good news, Bahrain, which is one of the Arab Gulf countries which signed a peace deal or a normalization deal with Israel as part of the Abraham Accords, came out and heavily criticized Hamas for the attack on October 7th. So that's an amazing turn of events that Arab countries are supporting Israel in its war against Palestinian terrorism. The other good news, the Arrow 3 missile, which is Israel's sort of next generation Iron Dome, although it doesn't hit rockets, it hits missiles, was successful again in knocking out 3 ballistic missiles fired from the Houthis in Yemen. So that's a tremendous success. So far, none of those missiles that have gotten through. There was one that Israel allowed to go through, so it diverted it to a different area. But this is the first time. There's been no time that a ballistic missile has gotten through. There have been plenty fired at Israel since the start of the war, and Israel is able to knock them down. A ballistic missile is a highly sophisticated missile. This isn't just the regular rockets by Hamas, which are unsophisticated, or even regular missiles being fired by Hezbollah. These are more serious, and it's amazing that Israel has the technology to be able to knock these out and show the enemies that everything they've invested in these ballistic missiles in the hopes that with a more sophisticated missile they'll be able to hit Israel harder has shown to be that doesn't work. Okay. There were other good news. 3 Hamas commanders were eliminated and taken out of action. It means they were killed, and they are no longer operating for Hamas. And that when you start killing off the commanders, so the ground troops are confused; they're not sure what to do. So that's a very positive development. And the last piece of good news is that Hamas operatives who operate in Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank, which is the other side of the country where I live. So the IDF has been knocking out Hamas members that live on this side of the country. This week or last night was in Jenin. Jenin is a hotbed city of terrorism, and the Israeli Defense Force, well, mostly everybody's looking at Gaza or the north, is also operating in a third theater, which is here in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank, and knocking off members of terrorist organizations here, especially of Hamas. Okay. Going on to bad news. Unfortunately, terrorists are still setting traps, which is why we're seeing every day we're seeing more casualties of IDF soldiers. Again, this is very hard to say this, but on the one hand, obviously every single soldier's life is valuable, and any one soldier that dies is a tragedy. On the other hand, looking at it from an objective perspective as to how Israel is doing in the war, we have lost 66 soldiers who have been killed since the start of the ground invasion. It's over 350 since October 7th attack, including the October 7th attacks. But in a war, that's an incredibly low number. So that number actually reflects great operations, success on Israel's part, that Israel's winning the war. Again, 66 soldiers are 66 families that will never get back, and forever will be tarred by this, as will the entire IDF and the Israeli nation. And we're grateful for their sacrifice. But that's horrible news. So that's why you're starting to see this, because you're starting to see the traps that are set, and unfortunately soldiers walking into those traps. the IDF, an IDF base was heavily hit by by rockets or missiles coming in from Hezbollah in the north, but thank God nobody was injured. They're just property damage. Okay, the African Union chief, who we'd expect, hopefully, in some sense, Africa has been hit by Islamic fundamentalist terrorism more than any other continent probably in the world, and including America after 9/11. And yet still comes out and says that Israel's actions in Gaza, meaning it's fighting to protect itself in Gaza, is fueling extremism. What he means to say is that the more we hit Hamas, the more Hamas is going to want to hit us, and the more the next generation is going to want to hate us. This is a completely naive view, which is either insidious and anti-Semitic against Israel, because it's speaking of bias against Israel that would never be accused to anybody else, that fighting terrorism will just breed more terrorism, or it's just complete ignorance as to how terrorism works. Terrorists choose to be terrorists. They don't need one of their family members to be killed to become a terrorist. Now, it's true that maybe somebody would not have taken down that path and now they will, but as a whole, terrorism is going to exist. And to say that we shouldn't fight terrorism in order not to inspire more terrorism is absurd, because by not fighting terrorism, then we still have terrorism. So that's it's an absurd type of idea. And the only way we're going to have peace is not by us appeasing terrorists. The only way we're going to have peace is by eliminating terrorists. By eliminating the people that don't want peace is the only way we get peace. We don't get peace by giving in to the terrorists. Okay. Other piece of disturbing news is America has released $10 billion to Iran. That's Iranian money that America had control over through the banking system and sanctions. And America released $10 billion to Iran. The reason why they did it is to supposedly support the Iraqi economy, which is collapsing. But we all know what Iran does with extra money, and what it does with extra money is it attacks, it uses it to support Hezbollah and Hamas, which furthers the attacks. So it's hard to understand why the Biden administration would, on the one hand, support Israel and give money to Israel, while on the other hand, allowing Israel's enemy, who's supporting Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists, to have extra funds. It's somewhat mind-boggling to me. Now, the Palestinian Authority is the ruling Palestinian entity that the world recognizes, as opposed to Hamas, which is the ruling Palestinian entity in Gaza, or was until a couple of days ago. And the Palestinian Authority is where the Biden administration and the Europeans and the Russians and the Chinese are putting their hopes. Now, this is who's going to rule, and it's been the hope of the world since the mid-90s, that the Palestinian Authority, then led by Yasser Arafat and now led by Mahmoud Abbas, would be the candidates, the moderates, to be able to make peace with Israel. Now, there's a reason why it hasn't happened in almost 35 years since the signing of the Oslo Accords. It's because the Palestinian Authority obviously does not want peace. It doesn't want a democratic country. And it also boggles the mind why the Western world still puts faith in them. And now you can only imagine President Biden had written an op-ed on Saturday night, where it was published Saturday night, which called for a two-state solution where there would be a Palestinian state made up of Gaza and the West Bank. This is some point in the future, and run by the Palestinian Authority. Now, the Palestinian Authority should have been greatly inspired by this and complimented and by the praise of the President of the United States. They paid it back by releasing a statement saying that Israel was the one that conducted the October 7th massacre. It wasn't Hamas terrorists, and this whole war in Gaza is unjustified because Palestinians never did anything to deserve this. Now, it's absurd, obviously, to think that Israel did the October 7th attack. Not crazy because Mahmoud Abbas, who's the leader of the Palestinians currently, has a PhD from when he was younger, earned a PhD in Holocaust denial, saying that the Holocaust was an exaggeration. And so to think that he would then go ahead and not claim that October 7th was conducted by Israel is itself, a little naive. So this is perfectly consistent with the Palestinian Authority's intransigence and refusal to sign a peace deal with Israel, and now going ahead and supporting Hamas, essentially, and supporting other Palestinian terrorists, again, consistent with its ways. But it does cause you to think, why would America and the Western world continuously put faith in Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, especially when they release statements like this? And President Biden, in that same opinion piece that he put out in the Washington Post, also threatened settler extremists. This is something that we've been talking about. He threatened to not allow any settler extremists into the United States of America. That's all great, except for the fact that, as we've said over and over again, no evidence has ever been proven, has ever been given that there actually is violence caused by settlers. It's all accusations made by Palestinians or anti-Israel non-government organizations, NGOs. There's never been any evidence. There's no names that you could point to as settler extremists. There's no settler extremist movement with a leader that you could point to. It doesn't exist. So this idea of an empty threat is sort of undermines the Biden administration's credibility, but I don't know who they're playing to try to impress with this. Okay, the Houthis hijacked a ship, which for some reason they thought was an Israeli ship. There's not one Israeli on board the ship. They took it in the Red Sea, and everybody's kind of wondering what they're doing. The America and Iran are continuing their shadow war, which means that they're continuously hitting each other, tit for tat, a little less than Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah has fired over 1,000 missiles into Israel. But America and Iran keep doing this. I'm not sure. There's been over 40 American soldiers that have been injured by Iranian attacks. I'm not sure how long America lets this go on and says that, well, okay, they hit one of us, we'll hit one of them, as opposed to just saying, okay, enough, and we're going to take out the head of the snake. We're going to take out Iran. I'm not sure exactly where that line is for President Biden. Okay, well, that's it for the update. Let's answer your questions here. The first question: how much percent did the IDF take from Hamas today? I don't know how we judge percentages. I don't think there is such a thing as percentages of how much they take and how much they don't take. I don't understand the logic for giving Iran money either, since obviously they would use that for the wrong reasons. What do you think the logic behind the U.S. doing this is, and do you think they know it's wrong, but simply don't care, or they haven't realized? I think that the Biden administration is motivated for two reasons to release this money to Iran. One is that a lot of the money will be spent in Iraq and bolster the Iraqi economy, which will stabilize the region somewhat, and at the same time also keeps the negotiations with Iran going over when it comes to the Iranian nuclear program, which is still the biggest threat. We're focused a lot on Hamas and the war in Gaza, but we have to keep in mind that Iran developing a nuclear weapon would obviously be the worst thing that could happen. So I think America wants to keep that door open. And does that mean that they don't know? Do they not know how bad it is to give them money? And they're not dumb, so they have to recognize this. But I guess they think it's worth it. Okay, maybe I missed it in previous videos, but can you explain how Hamas was able to successfully infiltrate Israel on the 7th? And whose standard defenses are that in place? What was the human error? Okay, so we have explained it, but I'll go over it again. The idea is that Hamas did three things simultaneously, which overwhelmed Israel's systems. And again, there was a ton of human error. So it overwhelmed Israel's systems only because Israel wasn't on their best observation points. But Hamas at the same time flew drones over the cameras that observe what's going on around the border and dropped explosives on them and blew those up. At the exact same time that was happening, thousands of rockets were fired into Israel and the border was breached. So everybody's attention was in all different places. And it was a Shabbat morning. It was a festival, Simchat Torah. So also Israel wasn't at its highest mark in terms of its soldiers being on guard. So and there were warnings beforehand, and we'll find out if those warnings were just the average warnings, which would make sense to ignore, or if those warnings should have been paid more attention to. Those will come out after the war. There'll be commission of inquiries, and we'll find that out. Okay. Do you think President Biden meeting with President Xi from China was a positive meeting? Has it have any effect on the war in Gaza? I think anytime world leaders meet, it's mostly positive. The after all these meetings with world leaders, the meetings are private. Obviously, they're not open to the public, so we don't know what the actual words are said. But the White House usually releases what's called a readout. In the readout after the meeting with the president of China, the White House simply said that they talked about the Israeli-Hamas war and that Israel has a right to defend itself. I don't know what was really said. That's what the White House said was said. What progress has been made in talks between Israel and Hamas about swapping prisoners, especially regarding the release of women and children hostages? How does that affect the situation in Gaza? So we don't know if any progress is made, like we said in the video. It's all rumors now. In regards to the deal that is currently on the table, will the IDF still be able to go into Gaza to look for the remaining hostages during the 3 days of ceasefire? No, that's ceasefire means that there's no firing, and that would mean that IDF troop movements would not be allowed. Are they allowed to continue with their military work, or does the ceasefire mean that they need to put a stop to it during those? That means they put a stop to everything. Ceasefire means everything stops. What news sources do you recommend to stay updated on the news of the war, hostage deals, and other important information? So I think that you should be looking at Times of Israel, the Jerusalem Post, Haaretz. That gives you left, right, and middle of Israeli news. And I think it's important also to look at things like Politico and CNN and Fox News just to see what's being said out there. Those are important news sites. How to convince pro-Palestinian people that we are using actual facts from reliable sources to support our Israel argument, because many of them believe our sources are biased. You can't convince somebody who believes that your sources are biased that you are in fact using facts. People either get it or they don't get it. You're not going to be able to convince somebody that just simply says, "Well, your facts are biased." If facts aren't biased, facts are facts. In other words, if the hospital is being used, yeah, that's it. But I want to stress something when talking on social media with other people. A lot of times, Israel like lovers and Zionists and pro-Israel advocates, they make a mistake is that they stay on the defensive, as if it's our we have to prove ourselves. We don't have to prove ourselves to anybody. We're a country that's 75 years old. We're a tremendous success. We're older than half the countries of the world, and a terrorist organization attacked us. If you don't give us the benefit of the doubt and think that we're making stuff up, and you'd rather give the benefit of the doubt to the side that rapes, beheads, kidnaps all innocent people, then you have a problem. And that's not our problem then to try to convince you. Okay, what do you think should be done to keep the hostages safe? And how can the international community help? The international community should be pressuring Qatar, who has Hamas's ear, to give up the hostages. What we do to keep the hostages safe is find them and rescue them. That's it, and defeat their enemy and defeat the people holding them. Do you like the current proposed deal between Hamas and Israel? Do you agree with Netanyahu? Is 50 people in exchange, in addition to having the ceasefire enough? No, I think we need a lot more than 50 people. I think that once we start giving in to too little and give away a lot for it, then it just emboldens our enemies and allows them to keep doing things. I think that's a big mistake. What do you think about all the weapons being kept hidden in the hospitals? What do I think about it? I think it's bad. I think that that should not happen. We should not be keeping weapons in hospitals, and I think it's a war crime because it is. And the world should see things like this and say, okay, that's clearly not the side we should be on. We should be on Israel's side here. What will be possible repercussions of the deal with Iran to get $10 billion be? Will the UN do anything to counteract the possibilities? No, what happens when Iran it's not a deal, but what happens when Iran gets that money is they use it to sponsor terrorism. Simple as that. That's where the money goes. Okay. Okay, so if America knows about China's plans with TikTok, why don't they just ban the app in its entirety in the United States? So there are proposals to ban TikTok in America. The idea being, this is from a previous video, the idea being that China uses TikTok to undermine the messaging that America has, and but there are members of Congress and the Senate who want to ban TikTok. And the problem is it's a First Amendment issue. The United States has free speech, so to ban a platform of speech is a serious move that could be challenged in the courts and overturned. So it has to be done the right way. What does the ceasefire mean to the ground invasion? The ceasefire would halt the ground invasion. If it's a full ceasefire, like you see the protest signs that says, we want a full ceasefire. So that would end the war and let Hamas get away with it. And then the hostages would stay for years. And then the world would know that Israel's open to attack. So that's why Israel refuses to conduct a ceasefire. A pause in fighting, which would mean literally that there would be a pause in fighting until the pause ended. I know the number 11,000 deaths is not accurate, but what do you think the number is? What percentages of deaths are terrorists versus civilians and children? So the number that where we see here, the 11,000 is released by the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is essentially Hamas. There's no difference. There's no independent Gaza Ministry of Health. Anything that comes out of Gaza is straight from Hamas. So Hamas says that 11,000 people were killed. There's no way of knowing how many people are killed. First of all, because many, if not most, bodies of people that died in bombings are still under the rubble. That's number one. So there's absolutely no way of even knowing how many people were killed. Number two, there's no body count that can be relied on. So nobody has any idea. It's anybody's guess how many people died. And any number that did come out of Gaza would include, as you wrote, members of Hamas that were killed. So the number 11,000, I'm thinking that 11,000 people died is ridiculous. Nowhere near that many people died. And thousands of the people that did die are Hamas militants, Hamas terrorists. So it's like, it's absurd to think that number would be anywhere close. Do you think the deal of the 50 Palestinians for a 3-day ceasefire should be done? Okay, we already discussed that. Okay, that's the end of the questions and the end of this video. Please, if you have questions, leave them in the comments below this video. And we should have peace, we should have security, we should have victory, and our soldiers and our hostages should come home safely and soundly. Shalom.